Running as fast as he could, the man tried to hop between the metal tracks as he rushed toward the platform on the other side. One wrong step, the second his boot connected with the metal, he'd receive a powerful electric shock, and if he tripped and fell, he'd be done for. He could see the monstrous creature approaching, barreling toward him down the track, speeding much faster than he could run. It would take seconds for it to get to him, even though it looked to be miles away. In the blink of an eye, it closed that distance. He turned to look the other way, the deafeningly loud racket of twisting, ripping metal as the shattering of glass and something just as monstrous tore through the station. Its huge, numerous legs were the perfect weapons for pulling apart everything in its path. The train station had only just been completed, built only recently, and now it was being decimated before it could get any use. And that wasn't even the worst part. Far worse was exactly who or what was tearing the place to shreds. The huge shape racing down the tracks was getting closer and closer. He knew he had only precious seconds left before it would be too late. He rushed over the uneven gravel that had been laid on the ground for the track to go on top of. He wobbled, almost toppling over thanks to the rocky footing beneath his feet. It was only through panic, sheer adrenaline, and a moment of flailing that the man stopped himself from falling face first on the electrified tracks. The train came barreling toward him. There was less than a second left. It looked like something pulled straight out of a nightmare. Rows of teeth and a huge maw, locked open like it was constantly screaming. If he didn't get flattened, he was certain he'd be eaten. He leaped out of the way, climbing up to the opposite platform just as the train eater came speeding into Aranirum Station, and Choo Choo Charles came bursting out to greet it. For one of them, this was about to be the end of the line. All of this had started not long before. Aranirum had made national news after people learned of the incredible events that had taken place there. A gigantic creature, a horrifying fusion of a massive spider and an old rusted red steam train, had been terrorizing the locals relentlessly. The island's residents called him Choo Choo Charles, named in part out of spite for the wealthy mine company owner who'd been responsible for unleashing the locomotive monster. But thanks to a healthy dose of hubris and Choo Choo Charles himself, Warren Charles III had received his deadly comeuppance. With the help of a traveling archivist, the people of Aranirum had been able to carry out a plan to do away with Choo Choo Charles for good. Now with the tarantula-like train defeated, the islanders were safe once again, or so they foolishly thought. Of course, with the disappearance of a wealthy man like Warren Charles III, a lot of interested parties started to take notice of the quiet, secluded island of Aranirum. And so the residents living there were forced to come forward and explain what had happened. Not long after the Charles Mining Company had set up their operation on Aranirum, they discovered ancient ruins buried underground, along with strange glowing eggs. One of these had apparently hatched into a gigantic spider creature who'd become lodged in one of the mining company's steam trains that transported raw materials around the island on a rudimentary system of tracks. The islanders told the press that Warren Charles III and some of his workers had gone mad and began to worship Choo Choo Charles as he caused chaos across the island. Of course, the reporters wouldn't believe such an outlandish story without proof, so they were directed toward a deep chasm on the island. Looking down, they were treated to quite the remarkable sight. A mess of scrap metal and spider legs, a ruined steam engine, and the scary creature within it. That served as pretty irrefutable proof that Choo Choo Charles was real, and everyone back on the mainland was about to find out. People read the story, some becoming fascinated by the legend of the terrifying train. It seemed so improbable, impossible even, but somehow it was real. For many, just reading or hearing the story wasn't enough, and some started to plan trips out to the once quiet island of Aranirum to see what remained of the half-train, half-spider for themselves. As the islanders tried to get back to their ordinary lives, repairing all the damage done by Choo Choo Charles, they were soon met by fanatics flocking to their homes to take a look at the fallen monster with their own eyes. But rather than reject this sudden boom of tourism, the people living on Aranirum Island decided it was in their best interest to encourage more people to come and see Charles, so they could charge them. The way they saw it, if people were willing to make the long ferry ride from the mainland to the island, then they'd probably pay to see or take pictures of what was left of Choo Choo Charles. And the islanders all agreed that money could be put to good use, providing for their community and helping them rebuild. And so, the official Aranirum tour train was launched. Reusing the old tracks from the mine trains, a group of the islanders would take groups of tourists across their homes. They'd tell the full story of Choo Choo Charles before coming to their destination, the chasm where the monstrous locomotive had met his demise. Word quickly spread of the island's new prosperous success, and while many praised what they were able to accomplish, there were those who weren't so happy to see Aranirum thriving. Warren Charles IV seethed as he read the headlines. Island locals make tourist boom after giant monster attacks. The son of the now defamed industrialist ripped the newspaper to shreds out of frustration. His father had been directly blamed for what had happened on Aranearum and was at least in part indirectly responsible. It had been Warren Charles III's actions that led to Choo Choo Charles being unleashed, and now his family name and, more importantly, his company's name would be forever associated with a murderous monster. Seeing the people of that island able to rake in a profit while continuing to tarnish the name of the company he'd inherited made Warren IV's blood begin to boil. When he heard about how they were using the leftover mine trains, it gave him an idea. The devious heir to the Charles Mining Company fortune began to draw up plans to take his own share of the profits. Meanwhile, across a number of major cities on the mainland, a strange phenomenon was occurring. But thanks to everyone being so distracted with all the excitement surrounding Choo Choo Charles, it had mostly flown under the radar. The few articles that did acknowledge the incidents didn't do nearly enough research to pick up on what linked them all. People were disappearing, and all in the exact same way. Due to the incidents being spread around a few different cities, no one picked up on it, but the handful of people that had seemingly vanished were all most recently seen inside train stations. The disappearances only happened late at night, usually just before the last scheduled train of the day. In most major cities, that was around midnight. The unassuming victim would be waiting on the platform, most likely after a long shift at work that ended so late that they were relying on that train to get them home where they could sleep off their exhaustion. That was when they vanished without a trace. But these weren't targeted kidnappings. These unfortunate victims had fallen prey to the train eater. Most people weren't even aware that the train eater existed, and that was one of the monster's greatest strengths. It almost resembled a basking shark, but out of the water and covered in too many eyeballs that covered the length of its body. It slithered at the speed of a subway car through dark tunnels, seeking out its next victim with its multiple eyes. The people that it had caught all thought their train was about to come in. Little did they know their journey was terminating earlier than expected. The train eater had been continuing its tour de feast across the mainland. Wherever there were tracks, it could travel, and that allowed it to cover a lot of ground in a fairly short amount of time. It was strategic, never swiping someone from the same station or even the same city twice in a row. Instead, the train eater spread out its attacks and thus made itself harder to notice and therefore harder to stop. But while all this was occurring, another evil creature was up to no good. Warren Charles IV. He'd been met with a raucous chorus of boos and insults when he publicly announced his intention to visit Aranearum Island to personally apologize to the islanders for his father's misdeeds. And despite the cold reception from tourists, Warren IV seemed to be staying true to his word when he met with the island's residents. But the disgraced philanthropist's son seemed particularly eager to meet with the islanders running the Choo Choo Charles tours. No one was privy to their conversation, held in private aboard Warren IV's yacht as he moored in the Aranearum docks. Nobody knew what he had threatened or bribed the islanders with, but it wouldn't take long for them to see the outcome. Within the next few weeks, construction had begun as Warren Charles IV announced to the world his plans to turn Aranearum into a thriving tourist attraction. His reason, at least the one he gave to the papers, was both to pay recompense to the island that Choo Choo Charles had destroyed, thanks to his father, and to also restore the good name of the company. But of course, Warren IV's intentions were far less noble than he would have ever openly admitted. He wanted the lion's share of all the money being made on Aranearum, and by driving more tourists to the island, he would help himself to a substantial cut. And so his first proposal was to construct a better, more efficient way to get even greater numbers of spend-happy tourists to the islands. The ferries were too slow and took too long to sail from the mainland. Warren IV's solution? The Aranearum high-speed shuttle train. Over the coming months, the newly renamed Charles Construction Solution set to work, building an enormous length of track. It snaked its way over the water across a specially made bridge that would carry simultaneous trips to and from Aranearum, carrying tourists in their droves. Warren IV had likened it to the shuttle buses at big theme parks, taking their guests from hotels right up to the parks themselves. And that's what he had planned to turn Aranearum into, with the use of a high-speed train instead. And it seemed to be playing out exactly how he wanted, until one night. Construction had to be halted temporarily, when just as the project was nearing completion, a huge lightning storm erupted over Aranearum. Far out to sea, harsh storms were common, and much to Warren Charles IV's frustration, the conditions made working on the shuttle train impossible. But it was during this storm that a bolt of lightning zapped down from the sky and hit the chasm where Choo Choo Charles had fallen. When construction concluded the following week, Warren IV was eager to rush through the opening ceremony. Time was money, and there had already been one delay too many. It was time for his train to come in, although it wouldn't be the train Warren IV was expecting. Neither of them would be. As the track to Aranearum had been built, the train eater had taken notice too. To it, this track was a pathway for more food. Flocks of people from the mainland had gathered on Aranerum, specifically to catch the new convenient high-speed train back. But as they amassed at Aranerum's first train station, watching Warren IV cut the ribbon to open it up to the public, an unexpected guest came barreling in to disrupt proceedings. Choo Choo Charles was back. The few tourists who found themselves thinking this was an elaborate show to mark the occasion with a life-size animatronic of the infamous train monster were quickly proved wrong. Charles was enraged. He remembered falling to his death, that the humans had somehow bested him, and he was hungry for revenge. People fled in all directions. Some rushed back to the harbor, only to find that the ferries they'd arrived on had all turned around and left them stranded. They'd all been planning on going back via train. What need did the boats have to stick around? Some rushed into the station, moving as quickly as they could up the platform. The shuttle train was on the way due to its maiden arrival at Aranerum Station any moment to coincide with the grand opening ceremony. Those in attendance hoped that they could get aboard and depart to the safety of the mainland before Charles had finished tearing the station building apart. Making it up to the platform, pushing and shoving to barge his way to the front of the crowd, Warren Charles IV spotted a shape approaching on the horizon. He felt a pang of relief, despite all the panic. His train was working as intended, and he'd be the first aboard, carried away to safety. He could pin all the blame for Choo Choo Charles's resurrection and rampage on the islanders, and claim that they failed to make sure things were safe, also that he could save face. But a few eagle-eyed bystanders who also had made it to the platform spotted that there was something strange about the train speeding toward Aranerum Station. It had teeth. Trapped between two terrifying trains, people scattered, some trying to get across the opposite platform to get away from both Choo Choo Charles and the train eater. Instead of being the first to escape Aranerum and destruction of his new station, Warren IV was the first caught in the jaws of the train eater as it sped toward the island. Either because he had sensed the other train creature's approach or because he was simply done trashing the station's atrium for now, Choo Choo Charles smashed his way to platform level. People were screaming in fear, scattering in all directions to avoid the pair of carnivorous locomotives. But Charles's attention quickly turned from all the human visitors to his island to the creature that had just come into the station, gnashing its huge jaws dotted with wide eyeballs. Back when he'd been freely scuttling around the surface of Aranerum, Choo Choo Charles was known to be fiercely territorial. In fact, he regarded the entire island as his territory, all his, and he wasn't one to share. Seeing another train in his dominion, daring to eat his prey, only sent Charles into even more of a rage. More interested in the veritable feast that had been waiting for it on the platform, the train eater hadn't paid Charles much attention. That is, until the gigantic spider-legged steam train rushed forwards and slammed into it. Charles gave a snapping bite of his razor-sharp teeth, damaging the train eater as he simultaneously used his front legs to scratch at the intruder to his territory. The train eater pulled back, reversing along the shuttle train tracks as it reared up to fire itself at Choo Choo Charles. It shot forwards with all the speed of an enormous bullet. Charles, being able to move about free from tracks thanks to his legs, went to leap out of the way, but the train eater was faster. The huge-jawed creature collided with Choo Choo Charles just as he leaped up. The huge force of the impact caught him mid-air and sent Charles crashing into the nearby platform, demolishing even more of Aranerum Station. Although it wasn't used to fighting since its human prey wasn't big enough to harm it, the train eater quickly realized that this method of attack was rather effective against its new enemy. It used its greater speed to its advantage. While Choo Choo Charles was flat on his back, massive spider legs flailing in the air as he tried to flip himself back over, the train eater got ready to strike again. The long carnivorous train creature zipped backward, using all its speed to go into full reverse. If it could get all the way back to the terminal on the mainland, then send itself speeding forward again, it would clatter Choo Choo Charles and send him flying. Just as the train eater was going into full reverse, Choo Choo Charles was able to correct himself, scuttling the right way up. The terror of Aranerum quickly noticed its speedy adversary was reversing away from the decimated station, although he had no idea if it was a retreat from their battle or the buildup for another attack. Charles was too enraged to care. He would make sure he drove this usurper out of his territory once and for all. Scurrying into the tracks on his many legs, Choo Choo Charles began charging as fast as he could toward the train eater. He wasn't fast enough to catch up with it, even on 4 pairs of legs, but he wouldn't stop until he had defeated it. Speaking of stops, the train eater had reached its original departure station back on the mainland. The tracks intended for the high-speed shuttle train helping it move all the faster. Off in the distance, it saw Charles heading down the tracks toward it. Accelerating to full speed in a frighteningly short time, the train eater shot off down the track, barreling toward Charles, who was crawling straight at it in the opposite direction. The two train monsters were heading for a devastating head-on collision. that was either set to end with one or both of them destroyed. Suddenly, Choo Choo Charles stopped in his tracks, seeing that the train eater was hurtling his way. It could move so much faster, and that meant it was building more and more momentum. If they collided head-on, Charles realized he stood little chance of survival. So instead, he examined his surroundings, short on time as the train eater sped closer and closer. But if speed was its advantage, then Charles would just have to use one of his own: strength. The bridge that Warren Charles IV had rushed his workers to construct had some noticeable structural integrity issues. The structure would hold the weight of a train, but too much damage and the supports could break entirely. So using all of his legs and mustering up all his strength, the steam engine-encased spider monster started tearing at the bridge, pulling up track and attacking the supports. He was trying to snap the bridge in the middle, chipping away at the metalwork until it gave away. The train eater was still hurtling toward him from the mainland, building even greater speed with which to ram into Charles, but it was going far too fast to stop. Suddenly, breaking through the underside of the bridge, Choo Choo Charles channeled every ounce of his strength into his front four legs and heaved. The bridge started to buckle, bending upward like a ramp, just before the train eater was close enough to impact. Unable to stop, traveling at tremendous speed, the train eater was suddenly launched into the air thanks to the sudden elevation of the track beneath it. It had been going so fast that the momentum carried it as it sailed up high into the air. It cleared the island of Aranirum like a home run before gravity caught up with it. The train eater came tumbling back down, landing in the water with an almighty splash. But even with the train eater defeated, there remained one inescapable problem. Choo Choo Charles was still alive, back from the grave. And now, lowering the bridge and crawling across it, he had a path that led directly to the mainland.